So it's a delight today to have Helen with us. Helen's the founder of Human Advantage. Helen and I have known each other for a while now. So I know Helen as an executive coach, one-to-one and group coach. And Helen has now published her book. So I'm really
You
sort
bet.
of excited today. Our first alumni who's published a book, so Human Wise. Um, and we're going to talk fundamentally about your book today, Helen. But I'm really grateful for you making the time to have this conversation and share some of your experience with our alumni as well.
Thank you,
So
Damion.
how would you like to introduce yourself, Helen?
I'd like to say good afternoon on this wonderfully warm, sunny Friday lunchtime. Thank you for Jamie and I were joking as we came on. It's like I'm fighting between this conversation and the sunshine outside. So if you're sat outside in the sunshine listening to this in your garden, that's absolutely brilliant. Please ask questions about what's in the book, about the process. I'm here. So please keep it conversational and I'm happy to answer
Hmm.
anything and be open. Damien, it's really wonderful to be here. It's probably worth me just taking a step back and introducing myself in terms of to give people a little bit of background of where I've got to this point. I'm actually a chartered accountant by original trade. So many moons ago, I'll just say it out there, I had my 50th birthday end of last year. So that kind
Okay.
of dates me. But I think it's important because when I started in finance, I was with a firm called Arthur Anderson, and I looked up in that firm and I never wanted to sell. I didn't want to be out there selling. That wasn't me. I love finance. I love the business side of things. Whistle Stop Tour, I decided to leave just as the firm was going under, actually, really because I didn't want to sell. And I moved into Disney, Fox Family Worldwide, where I really wanted to stretch my learning. And I looked at an MBA, but I was really interested in the people side of business. And so I studied a master's in management development and organizational change. That was back in 2006, thinking maybe I'll step into HR or do something like that. It wasn't for me. The opportunity wasn't quite right. I really loved the commercial element of what I did. Um, a period of traveling, came back, I was engaged, wanted to settle down. I was like, oh shit, I need a job, excuse my language. And the consulting world was booming. And that's why I moved into KPMG. And I was in KPMG consulting in the sort of finance and operational change teams. It really blended the human skills, the finance skills. And then I had my two children. My two children are now 16. We're about to launch into GCSEs later this week. So if anybody else is there, we're in it with you. And 16 and 14. And I was really fortunate that KPMG provided me with a maternity coach at that time. So they had a few external people to support some of their top talent with a coach. And that was really my first brush with coaching. And Zach was born in 2010, so that was 2010, 2011. And then when I returned, they were recruiting for associate coaches. So many of you will be familiar with the internal coach model. And I trained as a coach with EMCC. And that's where Damien and I met for the very first time because I was on one of your programs as part of that. Um, Fast forward a lot of years, I stayed with consulting for a while. It wasn't conducive to with the two young children. I had an internal role, and then I missed clients. And they said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I miss clients." They were recruiting for some sales leaders, and I said, "Well, why didn't I do that?" Bearing in mind that 20 years ago I'd never wanted to sell, and they were like, "Oh, I'm not sure you can do that." And that's where I started the journey because the last 6 years of my client career at KPMG, I was a global client leader. So I effectively sat across the top of the firm, opening doors, building relationships, creating opportunities, winning work for the business. And people said, "You're brilliant. Why are you good at what you do?" And I didn't know. I'd never wanted to sell. I also wanted to further my learning, and that's where I did the advanced diploma with you, Damien. And I started the advanced diploma just pre-pandemic. So we did one session in person and then it all went online, which was wonderful in so many ways. But what I did was I unpicked it. I unpicked it and I said, why am I good at what I do in the boardroom? And I said, the reason that I'm good at what I do in the boardroom is because I've been trained as a coach. And at the same time, what I was witnessing, not just with KPMG, but more broadly across the commercial world, was this constant focus on growth and doing more by almost sort of stick-based approach. We need more or do more, but we need human-centered leadership. And then through the pandemic, we started to see who people were behind the screens. And that really was the genesis of the human advantage. It took me a while to get there. I had a health blip, KPMG supported me, but the genesis of the human advantage came before the book. And it was really about how can we blend humanity with commerciality and putting coaching skills at the heart of everything. Because for those of us in the call probably know and love coaching, I shared it at the launch. We know what it is, we know the power. We talk about coaching one-to-one in groups. We talk about leader as coach. But for me, there's a massive gap how we use coaching skills in commercial conversations. And when we start to link the power of coaching to top and bottom line growth directly, not indirectly, then we can start to shift the dial and bring coaching more in as a foundation of growth and human-centered leadership. So that's a whistle-stop tour of the journey, the genesis of the human advantage, and ultimately is what I put in this.
Yeah, well, amazing. Thank you, Helen. And I suppose it chimes with a lot of my experience of working with people from similar backgrounds in terms of business development as well, where they start to make connections between the skills they're utilizing in coaching when they're training as a coach, and actually how can they bring more of these skills into their client meetings and the way that they're showing up with clients. So I appreciate this is a reflection of all of that,
Yeah.
but writing a book is no easy task. So I suppose, yeah, the question comes up for you is just, yeah, what was the catalyst? I hear it was your experience, but what was really the intent of creating this book,
I think the intent was to help other people,
Mm,
was to put the wisdom and experience that I have been fortunate to have over the last 25, 30 years into something that's practical for others. So that was the intent.
mm,
Um, and I just wanted to spread the word.
mm,
And I love working with my clients, but actually how can we spread the word? And it was my husband that's like, you should put your ideas into a book, and that's kind of
mm,
where we started.
mm. Thank you. And you know, with the book, you use the mnemonic human. And I know, with some of the names I can see on the screen, obviously as coaches, uh, people can often feel challenged by, client relationships and selling. So I just
Yeah.
wondered if, again, I appreciate we could spend a day probably really unpacking, the wisdom that's in here around your mnemonic of human, but just if it's okay, share a little bit around the mnemonic and what's covered in the book.
Yeah. Um, Firstly, I'm going to credit the wonderful Paul Golding, who many of you will know, who works at Catalyst. Paul and I both left KPMG about the same time, and it was him when we were sort of noodling on the human advantage and all my ideas. We love a good question, and he said, "What can you do with human?" And
Mm,
that was the genesis, and Paul's credited in the book. Um,
mm,
the human is, as you say, a simple mnemonic. We talk about how you show up, understanding others, how your mindset matters, how do you act and adapt, and then what are the next steps, and then ultimately I put in brackets, how do you negotiate?
mm,
Why have I put that together? Because a lot of these skills that we talk about that we all know and love and embody on a day-to-day basis are quite nebulous. They're quite hard to sort of touch and feel, and that's what I feel people, these soft skills or the EQ skills or emotion. What is it? And so the human gives a framework for people to think about. And the H for me is really, really important, how you show up.
mm,
Because when we talk about sales, when we talk about business development, when you look at a lot of the training, people are like told what to do. But for me, it's a confidence piece. Actually, if we don't believe in ourselves, we can never stand and have a conversation with others. And so for me, the real difference between the human approach is taking time to understand who we are. If you think about coaches, who you are, what the value is that you bring, specifically you, maybe your organization, why you and nothing else, what are your values, what are your beliefs, and why does that matter to your clients? And so before we get into how can you help others? How can you sell, win work, collaborate? For me, there's a big part about starting with really who we are.
mm,
And for coaches, I think that's hugely powerful because actually that's what we're really good at,
mm,
more so than others that we work with who can find it quite uncomfortable.
mm. Yeah, thank you, Helen. So I was going to say to the group that are listening, if there are questions that you'd like to pose to Helen, listening to what she shared so far, please feel free to add them into the chat and we'll see where we can get. Um, but one of the hearing you say that, Helen, I suppose that one of the things that I often hear from coaches is um, the challenge they have with selling and the whole notion of selling. And yes, they may have, I don't know, perhaps started to reach out to people and they're not necessarily getting the response that they were hoping for. So one of the questions I did want to ask you today actually was, just in your experience, how do you support people to build resilience, in terms of business development?
Yeah. Um, I think number one is the power of reflection, and
Mm,
coaches will get that. We can learn from every single conversation and experience. Um, Reminding ourselves of why us. That's why we start with who we are. Um, and reflect, how did conversations go? What was of interest to them? What wasn't? Where are they at? I think so often we go in thinking, well, this is what I do as a coach, and therefore that's what, unless they need that, well, then there's no interest. Actually, when I started the Human Advantage, I started with a completely empty inbox. I had a thesis, I had an idea, and I was like, what can you do, Helen? I said, you build relationships. And actually, for me, my offer to coaches is, how can you use those skills that you use every day brilliantly with your clients to go and sit and listen, get curious to those people that you may or may not work with in the future, and and to get curious, ask them questions. You don't need to be saying, "Oh, this is what I'll do for you." Maybe it works. Maybe there's a match. But the clearer you can be about who you are and what you can bring, even if there's not a match, they then remember you and they can refer you on. So how is my business growing? Actually, my business is growing by clients that I'm working with and introducing me to say, oh, you've got a group of people that you need to talk to Helen Wada of the Human Advantage. Now, that's been step by step in the book. I talk about one conversation at a time. I think sometimes we beat ourselves up and make it this big thing. Actually go and, reframe it. I talk about reframing sales as about adding value, having a conversation, seeing where there's opportunities for mutual interest. And then the key is, how do you take it forward? I think a lot of people struggle with those next steps. Like, you have one good conversation. So what's next? And I
mm,
think I talk about it in the book, you always have to have a commercial focus to the company. This isn't a chit chat. Like, you've got, what's the opportunity cost of you spending your time in this conversation? You could be with another client, you could be delivering something. So we have to be commercially focused in those conversations. What do you want to get at the end of it? And be clear, be transparent. Curious to see if there's any opportunities for us to work together. And then what's next? And if there's not another, who could you introduce me to? Who else in the organization should I meet with? What would
mm,
be most helpful for you? How do we stay in touch? All of those kind of human questions actually are the start of the genesis of the business opportunities that you'll create.
mm. Yeah, thanks, Helen. Thank you. And one of the things I've admired as I've obviously seen Human Advantage, from its birth to where you are now is also just how I suppose how proactive you've been in terms of what you've been doing to promote the business as well, for example, with your podcast. So I just wondered if
Yeah.
you could share a little bit because people may be interested in connecting with your podcast as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Damien. Do you know what? I've grown to love the podcast. The podcast came before the book, but actually, it was the book that started the podcast. So when I started thinking about writing a book, I worked with a different organization, and I said, well, this is my idea. And they said, where's all your research? I'm not an academic, I'm a practitioner. And so I parked the book, and they said to me, why don't you do a podcast? I'm like, what do you mean, why don't I do a podcast? What's all this about? But I take the plunge. I'm like, right, let's do it. If you don't push yourself out your comfort zone. And so the podcast was born as a way of having conversations around topics that were of interest to me. And actually, that's where the title Human Wise was born. Um, I didn't realize until about 6 months later that Human Wise is the same initials as Helen Wada. We've never quite played on that from a marketing perspective, but it took me a while. Um,
Hey.
and so, I mean, for anybody that's interested, I outsource the production. I'm not a techie person. Um, and I did the first 15 episodes with the company that I was working with. I've since found somebody that's a lot cheaper that's not in the country that helps me do that. But then when the podcast became really powerful was actually having conversations that were recorded that then provided first-hand research for the book. So there's a lot of stories in the book that come
Mm,
out of brilliant conversations with senior leaders, coaches. You've been on there, Paul's been on there.
mm,
Um, to just for people that want to listen about different topics, linking sales, coaching, leadership together. Um, and I've got to, I mean, people are now starting to email me saying, can I come on your podcast? We're about 63 episodes in, which is madness.
mm,
But there's loads of great conversations there. And on my website, there's blogs that are summaries of those conversations. So if people don't have the time, they can dip in, dip out. But really, for me, it's about a value add. So when I'm working one to one, when I'm working with groups, there's only so much you can do in 4 hours a day, 2 days. It's like, well, here are the nuggets. And that's why
mm,
I've started the newsletter to keep the nudges going because I can't be there with everybody the whole time. And I've had so many people come back to me recently saying, thank you for the newsletter. I really love it. You've just nudged me to do something. And
mm,
that's all it's about, right? It's yes, it's that brand builder. I'm in pink today, but it's also about helping people. You know, you talk about that. It's difficult. BD is hard. BD is hard. There's absolutely no two ways about it. I find it hard. I wrote about that in my newsletter this week. I don't find it easy, which is actually why people can relate to us. Um,
mm,
you have to
mm,
build in that discipline and find accountability partners. You know, why does it matter to you? Comes back to you. Why does it matter to you? Do you have to do it or do you not?
mm. Thank you. Thank you. And so let's just carry on with this, Fred, because I'm liking this, your sharing of your experience. So if we think about the book, because we're here to celebrate
Yeah,
this, if there were one or two key nuggets that you would really offer the coaches that are listening in terms of their own BD and how they're building their business,
yeah.
what two nuggets come to mind first for you? What would you offer?
Oh, two nuggets. Um, One of my favourite phrases in the book is say it, believe it, become it. And what do I mean by that? I mean, we only get to this point by saying out loud to truly believe it and then to embody it. And that phrase came to me actually while I was coaching somebody in Kew Gardens many years ago. But it's been so true in developing the human advantage because I wasn't the founder of the human advantage. I was a global client leader at KPMG. But the more you say it to everybody, like your mates, your family, your friends, the people you're working with, the more you say out loud who you are and what you do, the more you start to believe it. It's this mindset muscle. And then all of a sudden you just are, right? You know, I stood on stage yesterday in front of 150 people and I was like, I'm Helen Wada, I'm the founder of Human Advantage, author of the book. But that hasn't happened overnight. That's taken about 3 years to get there.
Mm,
So say it, believe it, become it.
mm,
And I honestly think, and it comes back to what you were asking earlier, at the end of every chapter, there's a process for reflection. And I talk about review, reflect, reframe, and repeat. Coaches here will be familiar with reflection. I mean, I work a lot with people that don't reflect. So when you
mm,
do reflect, it's like, but that process of reflection, not just of your coaching conversations, but of your business development conversations, of yourself. What worked? How did I reach out to them? Did they come back to me? What did I say in that meeting? Was I
mm,
listening to what they were saying? What happens? And this was me right at the beginning. And I kind of occasionally catch myself because I get so excited. When we go into sales mode or business development mode, we all have a tendency to think about ourselves. Like we just do, right? Well, I've got to tell them about the human advantage. I've got to tell them about the book. Helen, shut up.
Mm,
Put your coaching hat on and get curious about what's important to them as individuals, what's going to help them personally, what's going to help them professionally.
mm,
And if you take that to a commercial edge, how could you help them achieve their dreams, achieve their ambitions? And they may or may not be much. So
mm.
those would be my two nuggets.
No, wonderful, wonderful. Oh, yeah, and it speaks fundamentally to us as coaches, get interested in the client. And the same thing, get curious, get interested, bringing those skills into that exchange, I really align with that.
But you do have to keep up the drumbeat of discipline.
Mm,
Like that's the one thing that I would say. It's the drumbeat of discipline, and the end of the next steps really matter.
mm,
I mean, I work with a brilliant virtual assistant and could not do what I'm doing without it. What were the 4 R's again? Review, review what you've done, reflect what worked, what didn't work, reframe. So if something didn't go so well, how might you reframe it? What have you learned from it? And then repeat, go again. And that go again is the go again. And that's what the drumbeat of the beat. Because every time you go, you'll learn and you'll do something different.
okay. Thank you. Thank you. So again, if there are other questions popping in or reflections or comments, please do feel free to add them to the chat. And I mean, you could just say the reverse of this, Helen, but if there were some common challenges you see or pitfalls people fall into when they're trying to develop business, what would you say are some things that you've seen, in terms of your work with clients that would be useful for the coaches to be aware
Yeah.
of?
I think number one is what I've just mentioned, is that we
Mhm.
have a tendency to talk about ourselves too much. Um, so that would be the first thing. Number two is that we want it to happen overnight and we rush it. And I think there's a tendency to go, when I'm going to a sales meeting, I want this contract. It doesn't work like, I mean, some of the contracts that organizations I'm working with have taken 15 months
Mm,
to actually get over the line.
mm, mm.
Um,
No,
there's been a,
especially at the moment in the current context as well.
especially at the moment.
Mm,
Um, I also think there's an underappreciation of the complexity of the buying process and who is involved in one of the things that I love about constellations, and we talk about that in all our coaching work, and many of the people listening will be familiar with constellations and systemic mapping. And I always take that systemic mapping, and I kind of do it naturally, so I don't
mm,
like map it out post-its these days. But actually, who are you talking to? Are you talking to learning and development? Are you talking to HR? Are you talking to the CEO? Are you talking to the CFO? Where does procurement fit into it? Because actually, as coaches trying to develop your business, there are so many different people within an organization
mm,
that you need to think about in terms of where is my business coming from right now. It's a mixture. um,
mm,
the biggest opportunities are coming when I'm talking CEO level, because I'm being sponsored down and then they
mm,
make it happen. But where are the budgets? The budgets are often in learning and development. There's often a disconnect between what the business needs and what L&D have the capacity to do. So what you end up doing is navigating. So coming back to your question, what would you talk about? Talk less about you and more about them. Put your coaching hat on.
mm,
Um, keep commercially focused. Keep on those next steps. And think about the systemic, the constellations of, we work with our clients and think about what's the situation in front of you. Map it out for your clients, potential clients, to work out who you need to navigate in this system.
mm,
Who's holding the purse strings? Because if you haven't got hold of who's holding the purse strings, what's their budget? Ask up front, because you
mm,
can spend an awful lot of time and they go, you haven't got any budget.
mm,
Okay, let's park that
mm,
for 3 months.
mm.
You've got to be commercially focused. You're not just giving away your time.
Yeah. So I've just seen you've just sold a copy of the book whilst we've been talking. So Sheila's been buying that one. Um, so I'm just reading a comment from Dion. Yeah, so Dion's just reflecting on obviously the growth of AI in industry and how it's affecting more junior grades. So she's just saying about reflection about makes me worry who the leaders of the future are, if that's taken out. Um,
I think it's a huge opportunity, Damien, and it's conversations that I'm having with organisations right now. If you think where we work, we tend to work at the top and the senior middle of organisations, but actually the ones that are switched on are saying we need these skills right down at the bottom. My
mm,
one of my big ambitions is when I get the business, running in a way is to spend more time with schools, is to
mm,
spend more time with the next generation. Because
mm,
for me, these human skills will matter more than ever in the age of AI.
mm,
But what's interesting, and I was on a call yesterday, is you've got AI and then you've got human skills. We're still not yet making the leap between the need for human skills and what human centered leadership actually is. And for me, that's my goal and my passion is how
mm.
do we build a more human working world by embedding coaching skills as a commercial imperative. And I won't stop until we get there.
Yeah, wonderful.
I need another 50 years, Damien.
But you never know. You never know with the advances in health, we may be there. Um, I appreciate we're sort of fast approaching time, Helen. I just wondered if you could perhaps, because you are running a session for our CPD day in June, and
Yeah.
people listening here may be interested in spending some more time with you. So, any sort of headlines in terms of the session and what you're going to be doing?
We take a coaching approach to developing your business. So it will be a really practical session to go through some of the concepts that we talk about in the book, give you an opportunity to think for yourself what your business means for you and what you might do differently to take it forward.
Wonderful. So, if anyone wants to connect with you, Helen, what's the best way?
Um, Drop me a note on LinkedIn and then we'll connect via email. My email is Helen Wada, WADA, at thehumanadvantage.co.uk. That on LinkedIn.
So, just as a way of closing today, Helen, what would you like to say to the group, just as a way of closing the session?
Be more human and enjoy the conversations.